been an interesting couple of days in the Disney Parks universe, and things just got a little more interesting with news that broke late Thursday, late last night. A trio of stories, actually, that broke. First, we have news from the OC Register that stated that the governor's office would have guidelines, actual guidelines, for the reopening of theme parks. And with today already being Friday, we can only assume that that means we're going to get those announcements today. Normally they don't do that kind of thing on a Saturday or Sunday. In fact, they typically hold those conferences. I've been paying attention to these things lately more than I ever have, but typically those conferences are held around noon, so look for that today. But then we got news that Disney and other theme parks, including Universal, expressed their desire to the state of California to not publish those guidelines. Now, I know what you're all saying. Wait, I don't get it. Weren't they just pressuring the state to issue those guidelines as recently as a couple days ago? We'll explain this in just a minute because this little nuanced part of the story is perhaps the most interesting of all the things we'll discuss in this video. Then, to top it off, news broke that Bob Iger was stepping down, resigning, quitting, well, whatever word you want to use to describe it. He was leaving his position within the governor's Economic Recovery Task Force. Quite scandalous. And of course, all of this is against the backdrop of the devastating layoffs that are happening right now within the Disney company and those leaked guidelines for theme parks. Guidelines that didn't look to be favorable at all to theme parks. And we'll begin this conversation by looking at the timeline for all of these events. Thursday morning, we posted a video discussing those leaked guidelines. And among the requirements was that the county had to be in the yellow category before the parks could open. And as I mentioned in that video, for those of us, in Southern California, being in yellow seems pretty much impossible right now. Almost everyone that I've spoken with, both familiar with the Disney story and just in general, Southern Californians who are familiar with the tier system, they all laughed at the prospect of us getting to yellow anytime soon. Now, apparently, Disney and the other theme parks got wind of those leaked guidelines, and apparently they agree getting to yellow is going to be very, very difficult. And this is almost certainly the reason why they are now asking the state of California to put off publishing those guidelines. And this is almost certainly what led to those two other late-breaking stories. Don't publish the guidelines, Bob Iger leaving the Economic Recovery Task Force. Now, personally, after having posted that video, I had some time to reflect on all the requirements there, and I began to think that maybe they had it wrong. Maybe it wasn't yellow that they were talking about because it's just too difficult. Maybe they were thinking it was orange. After all, if you set a barrier for entry to yellow, which is the top, it's the end. That's the ultimate goal in this tiered system, is to get to yellow. If you set that as the barrier for entry for opening theme parks and then limit it to 25% capacity and guests within 120 miles, you've got nowhere else to go, no other benchmarks to achieve in order to grow capacity to 50% or 75% and to extend the radius. Where do we go from yellow to help grow attendance in the parks? It just seemed unlikely. But then I got sent copy of a statement that the governor made today, Thursday. Not a statement, a response to a question from a reporter, where he asked the governor if he thought that he was caving in to pressure from Disney. Now, of course, he's not going to answer yes to that question, but he did provide a very detailed response to that question. Newsom responded saying, unequivocally no, and that's demonstrable by the guidelines we put out and the tier that we placed the reopening for those theme parks as proof point that we are not putting the health and safety of those visiting the state or those recreating in the state, that we are not putting them at risk. And of course, the operative statement here is the tier that we place the reopening of the theme parks. Now, that can only mean yellow, right? Because yellow, he's suggesting a severe response. Yellow is the only thing that can be severe. Orange would not be severe. That would be expected. That would be par. Maybe even a little lenient, if anything. Being that there's only 4 tiers. So he has to be talking about the yellow tier here. And this, of course, brings us back to Disney requesting that the state put off publishing those guidelines, which of course makes no sense at all given their previous statements, unless the guidelines are severely restrictive and it makes reopening the parks exceedingly difficult. So what they're asking for is, hey, how about you guys confer with us, with the theme park experts, to help you, to collaborate with coming up with a set of guidelines for reopening. Now, a couple things on that. This first sounds very much like the state and theme parks are not working together in creating these guidelines, as the governor's office has been suggesting. But second, and this is in all fairness, our theme park operators really our best source, our go-to source for figuring out how to deal with a national pandemic. I say this, of course, to advocate for some kind of middle ground. I think the science should come first. Not the opinions of non-experts in this field. But I do think that they should be consulted to find out what is possible, what is reasonable. And besides, didn't the governor say that they were in negotiations with theme parks? Still trying to figure out what that means. And then finally, as mentioned earlier, we have the Bob Iger story of him resigning from the governor's Economic Recovery Task Force. Now, there was no additional information in that news item. It was just basically the headline. He quit on this day. No quotes from Bob Iger, no quotes from the task force. As such, we're kind of left to fill in the blanks on what that means. And given the timing of all of this, one can only draw the conclusion that Bob Iger, amongst everybody else, was not a fan of these guidelines, or at the very least, is not a fan of the direction that the Economic Recovery Task Force is going in. So all in all, this adds up to some not so great news for those who are looking for the parks to reopen. If the press conference does go off at noon tomorrow, I'm expecting to hear guidelines very much like what we discussed Thursday morning. But if there is no press conference, then it's possible Disney's appeal to the governor worked, for the short term at least. So therefore, no news would be good news, again, to those who are looking or hoping for the parks to reopen. And of course, wherever you fall in this conversation, stay tuned to FreshBaked, because we'll be paying attention to this news very closely, and we'll be reporting on it as soon as we hear anything. So make sure that you're subscribed to our channel and that you turn on the notifications. And then you can also follow us on Instagram at _FreshBaked and on Twitter at FreshBakedDisney. That's fresh with no E. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Please remember to be kind to one another, and FreshBaked